You know that moment when the universe decides it hasn't messed with your life enough, so it just hands you a megaphone and a spotlight? Yeah. Apparently, the universe is a distant relative of my husband. Because one Tuesday morning, I wasn't just discovering a spreadsheet error. I was discovering my entire marriage was a meticulously crafted lie, complete with a bonus feature, a mistress who worked in the same building. And not just any mistress, mind you, but the new intern, fresh out of college, whose biggest life challenge until then was probably deciding between avocado toast and a smoothie bowl. Oh, the irony. I'd always considered myself fairly perceptive. I could spot a fake designer bag from a mile away, sniff out a bad investment faster than a bloodhound on a scent, and even predict when my mother-in-law was about to unleash a passive-aggressive comment about my cooking. But apparently, my radar for marital infidelity was set to sleep mode. Or maybe it was just so overwhelmed by the sheer banality of my everyday life that it missed the flashing red lights. My husband, Mark, bless his ambitious, utterly predictable heart, was having an affair. And not a discreet, let's meet in a dingy motel on the outskirts of town kind of affair. No, Mark preferred the, let's do it right under my wife's nose, preferably during office hours with someone I hired kind of affair. Because, convenience. The discovery itself was less a dramatic movie scene and more a slapstick comedy of errors. I wasn't snooping, mind you. I was merely trying to locate his missing gym bag, which, in a cruel twist of fate, had become a prop in this unfolding tragedy. He'd forgotten it at the office, a common occurrence, as his brain cells seemed to be primarily dedicated to quarterly reports and avoiding eye contact with me after 9 p.m. So, there I was, playing detective in his home office, a place usually reserved for his important calls and my occasional dusting. And that's when I saw it. Not the gym bag, no. That would have been too simple. Instead, nestled between a stack of untouched financial journals and a half-eaten protein bar was a small, perfectly wrapped gift box. Inside, a delicate silver necklace, engraved with two initials, M and L. Now my name is Aurora. Not L. My middle name isn't L. My mother's name isn't L. My dog's name isn't L. The only L I could think of was loser, which at that precise moment felt incredibly apt. My first thought wasn't anger, oddly enough. It was a profound sense of comedic timing. Of course it would be a necklace. Not a cheap motel receipt, not a lipstick-stained collar, but a necklace. Something so cliché, so utterly unoriginal, it felt like a bad rom-com script. I almost expected a cheesy soundtrack to start playing. Then came the second thought, which was less about the universe's sense of humor and more about its profound lack of respect for my intelligence. Mark, the man who once spent 3 hours debating the merits of different brands of toilet paper, had managed to pull off an affair right under my nose. The sheer audacity, the meticulous planning, or lack thereof given the misplaced evidence, the casual contempt for our 10 years of marriage. It was almost impressive. Almost. Like watching a toddler successfully navigate a complex obstacle course. You're amazed, but also slightly terrified for the future of humanity. I picked up the necklace, the cool metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat rising in my chest. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was more like a slow, simmering realization that I had been cast in a role I never auditioned for, the oblivious wife. And let me tell you, that role doesn't come with any awards. Unless you count the most likely to be discussed at family dinners behind her back trophy. I looked at the initials again. M and L. Mark and... who? The intern, I suddenly recalled, was named Lisa. Lisa, with her bright eyes and her penchant for asking Mark deep questions about corporate strategy during family barbecues. Lisa, who Mark had described as very bright, a real go-getter. Apparently, she was also a real go-getter in other departments. The initial shock gave way to a wave of something akin to morbid curiosity. How long had this been going on? How many late nights at the office were actually late nights with Lisa? How many times had I offered to bring him dinner, only for him to politely decline? Probably because he was already enjoying a candlelit meal with his new muse. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to sign up for a stand-up comedy class and turn this entire debacle into my opening monologue. Because if you can't laugh at your own impending marital implosion, what can you laugh at? The tax code. I put the necklace back, carefully, as if it were a ticking time bomb, which, in a way, it was. This wasn't just about a necklace or an affair. This was about being invisible, about being taken for granted, about being so thoroughly underestimated that my husband felt comfortable leaving evidence of his infidelity in his own home office. It was a declaration, a silent, glittering, "I don't see you," from the man who had promised to see me for the rest of his life. And that, my friends, was the real insult. The affair was just the delivery mechanism. The invisibility was the poison. And I, Aurora, was about to make sure everyone saw exactly what happened when you made me transparent. The plan started to form, not in a burst of vengeful fury, but in a quiet, almost meditative way. It was less about destruction and more about a very public, very theatrical re-education. Mark needed to learn a lesson, and Lisa needed a new career path. And I, Aurora, needed a new narrative. A narrative that didn't involve me being the punchline. So, with a deep breath and a newfound appreciation for dark humor, I closed the gift box, placed it back exactly where I found it, and started to plot. The gym bag? Still missing. But I had found something far more valuable. A reason to finally stop being so damn polite. My mother-in-law, bless her cotton socks and perpetually judgmental gaze, used to say that family was everything. "Aurora," she'd drone, usually while dissecting my choice of appetizer at Thanksgiving, "family is the bedrock, the foundation, the very air you breathe." Funny, because for years it felt like I was the foundation that everyone walked all over, the bedrock that got chipped away, and the air that everyone conveniently forgot to acknowledge, especially when it came to Mark. My sister-in-law, Brenda, a woman whose entire personality was built on being the favorite, would chime in, "Oh, Mark always puts family first, Mom. He's such a good son, a good brother." And I'd just sit there, smiling politely, wondering if family included the woman he married, or if I was just the unpaid household manager with spousal benefits. The microaggressions had been piling up like dirty laundry in a teenager's room. Mark's forgetfulness about our anniversary, his sudden business trips that coincided with my planned weekend getaways, the way he'd subtly dismiss my career achievements while simultaneously bragging about his own. It was a slow drip of emotional gaslighting, so insidious you almost started to believe you were the crazy one. "Are you sure I said that, honey? I think you might be misremembering. You're being a little sensitive, aren't you, Aurora? It was just a joke." Oh, the jokes. My life had become one long, unfunny stand-up routine, and I was the unwitting straight man. I was made a fool of. And honestly, I thought the family clown was my uncle, Jerry, who still told the same tired knock-knock jokes at every gathering. Turns out, Mark had taken over the role, but with a much darker, more elaborate act. The humiliation wasn't just in the affair itself, but in the sheer audacity of it. The way he'd look me in the eye, tell me he loved me, and then probably text Lisa about it 5 minutes later. The way he'd complain about being stressed at work, implying I should cut him some slack, when in reality, his stress was probably figuring out how to juggle 2 women without dropping either. Spoiler alert, he dropped me. Hard. The invisibility theme wasn't new. I'd been feeling like a ghost in my own life for years. At family dinners, my opinions were often unheard or, worse, attributed to Mark. "Oh, that's a great point, Mark. Aurora, what do you think?" And I'd just blink because I was the one who just said it. At work events, I was Mark's wife, not Aurora, the accomplished marketing director. It was like I existed in a perpetual state of soft focus, while everyone else was in sharp, vibrant color. And now, with Lisa in the picture, it was clear I wasn't just soft focus. I was completely out of frame. Probably cropped out of the family photo album, too, if Brenda had anything to say about it. The betrayal wasn't just Mark's. It was also the silent complicity of those around us. My friends who'd seen the signs but never said anything, probably out of a misguided sense of loyalty or just plain awkwardness. My own family, who, while loving, were often too wrapped up in their own dramas to notice mine. "Oh, Mark's just busy, honey," my mom would say, trying to reassure me, while I knew busy was code for busy with someone else's lips. It was like being on a sinking ship, and everyone else was politely pretending they didn't notice the water rising. "Lovely weather we're having, isn't it, Aurora? Don't mind that gushing sound, it's probably just the plumbing." The gaslighting was a masterclass. Mark had this uncanny ability to turn every one of my legitimate concerns into an indictment of my own sanity. "You're imagining things, Aurora. Why are you always so suspicious? Maybe you're just projecting your own insecurities onto me." He made me doubt my own perception, my own instincts. I started to second-guess everything, to wonder if I was just being paranoid, if I was too demanding, if I was the problem. It's a classic manipulator's playbook, and he was reading it like a pro. And I, the trusting idiot, was falling for it. Hook, line, and sinker. I almost started to believe that the necklace with the L on it was actually for his grandmother, Lillian, who, coincidentally, passed away 5 years ago. He was that good, or I was that blind. Probably a bit of both. The comparison game was another favorite. Not just with Lisa, but with everyone. My sister, Clara, a supermom who juggled triplets, a high-powered job, and a perfect organic garden, was always held up as the gold standard. "Clara manages to do it all, Aurora. Maybe you just need to be more organized." And now Lisa, the fresh-faced intern, was the new benchmark. Lisa is so enthusiastic, so eager to learn. "It reminds me of how you used to be, Aurora." Ouch. It was like being told your expired yogurt was once a vibrant, living culture. Thanks, Mark, for the subtle reminder that I was past my prime. The abandonment wasn't just emotional. It was physical, too. He was there, but he wasn't there. His eyes would glaze over during conversations. His phone always seemed to be buzzing with urgent work emails, and his touch became a perfunctory pat on the shoulder. It was like living with a very handsome, very well-dressed mannequin, a mannequin who occasionally left incriminating jewelry lying around. The irony was, I'd spent years trying to get his attention, to reignite the spark, to remind him that I was still here, still us, and all it took was another woman to finally make him see me, or rather, to make me see him. And what I saw wasn't pretty. It was pathetic. But here's the thing about being made a fool of. It can either crush you or ignite something fierce. For a while, I was definitely in the crushed camp, wallowing in a self-pity party that served stale crackers and resentment. But then, the anger started to percolate, slow and steady, like a good pot of coffee. And with the anger came a clarity, a very sharp, very sarcastic clarity. I wasn't going to be the pathetic, abandoned wife. I wasn't going to cry into my Chardonnay and listen to Adele on repeat. No, I was going to channel my inner Beyoncé, but with less dancing and more strategic humiliation. Because if you're going to be made a fool of, you might as well make sure the person who made you a fool gets a taste of their own medicine. And maybe a little extra, just for good measure. My plan was so discreet, so meticulously crafted, that even the CIA would take notes, probably while sipping artisanal lattes and debating the merits of various surveillance drones. I wasn't interested in a messy, public screaming match. That's for amateurs. I wanted something elegant, something unforgettable, something that would sting like 1,000 paper cuts and leave a permanent scar on Mark's carefully curated reputation. And Lisa's, for that matter. Because if you're going to play with fire, you shouldn't be surprised when you get burned. Especially when the fire is me, and I've been simmering for a decade. The first step was information gathering. I wasn't a spy, but I had access. Mark's phone, his laptop, his calendar, all ripe for the picking. Turns out he was less master manipulator and more sloppy amateur. His texts to Lisa were a goldmine of saccharine pet names and thinly veiled work excuses. "Can't wait for our late-night meeting, my little spreadsheet angel." Spreadsheet angel? Seriously? I almost choked on my morning coffee. The man had the romantic imagination of a brick. And Lisa, bless her naive heart, responded with emojis that made me want to gouge my eyes out. Little hearts, sparkles, a unicorn. It was like watching a middle school romance play out, only with higher stakes and much more expensive office furniture. I also discovered their preferred rendezvous point, the executive conference room on the 17th floor, after hours. Apparently, nothing says illicit affair like a whiteboard full of quarterly projections and the faint smell of stale coffee. It was so cliché, it was almost admirable. Almost. I also learned about Lisa's schedule, her meetings, her lunch breaks. She was a creature of habit, which, for my purposes, was a blessing. Like a particularly predictable, yet incredibly annoying housefly. My suffering, I realized, was a valuable resource. It wasn't just pain, it was fuel. Fuel for a masterpiece of passive-aggressive revenge. I started to ironize my own situation, turning the bitterness into a kind of dark comedy. Well, at least I know Mark has good taste in interns, I'd quip to myself, practicing my delivery in the mirror. Who knew my husband was into corporate espionage? On his own marriage, no less. It was a coping mechanism, sure, but also a way to detach, to see the whole thing as a grand, absurd play. And I, Aurora, was finally getting to write the ending. The biggest turning point was realizing how utterly underestimated I had been. Mark saw me as the stable, predictable wife, the one who handled the house, the finances, the social calendar, while he pursued his important career. He probably thought I was too busy coordinating his dry cleaning to notice his clandestine activities. Lisa probably thought I was some ancient relic, a relic that could be easily replaced by a younger, perkier model. They both clearly missed the memo. I might be quiet, but I'm not stupid. And I have a really good memory, especially for slights. And for where people keep their spare keys. I started to assemble the props for my grand performance. Mark's clothes, for starters. All of them. His favorite suits, his lucky golf shirts, his worn-out sneakers. Every single item that represented his comfortable domestic life. I packed them meticulously, not in a frantic, tearful rage, but with a calm, almost surgical precision. Each folded shirt was a silent promise of what was to come. Each pair of socks, a tiny, fabric-based taunt. I even included his toothbrush, because, hygiene is important, even for philanderers. Then there was the delivery mechanism. I needed a way to get the bags to their intended recipient without causing a full-blown riot in the lobby. I considered a drone, but that seemed a bit too flashy. A delivery service? Too impersonal. No, this needed my personal touch. A grand entrance. A dramatic reveal. And it had to be during a moment when Mark and Lisa were at their most vulnerable, their most exposed. A work meeting. A big one. The kind where everyone who mattered was present. The kind where reputations were made or shattered. I spent days perfecting my timing. I knew Mark had a major presentation scheduled for Tuesday morning. A quarterly review with the entire executive board and key department heads. Lisa, of course, would be there, probably taking notes, looking adoringly at Mark, and occasionally flashing her spreadsheet angel smile. It was the perfect stage, the ultimate audience. It was like the universe had handed me a script, and all I had to do was deliver the lines. And the luggage. My internal monologue during this preparation phase was a symphony of cynicism. Oh, Mark, you thought you were so clever, didn't you? Like a cat who thinks it's hidden its toy under the rug, completely oblivious to the tail sticking out. And Lisa, sweet, innocent Lisa, you're about to learn that some promotions come with unexpected baggage. Literally. I even started practicing my innocent bystander face, the one that said, "Oh dear, what a terrible misunderstanding," while my eyes screamed, "This is exactly what I planned, you morons." The night before the big show, I slept like a baby. A baby who had just finished rigging a complicated Rube Goldberg machine designed to deliver maximum public humiliation. There were no tears, no doubts, no last-minute pangs of conscience. Just a quiet, almost serene anticipation. I had transformed my pain into purpose, my invisibility into a spotlight, and tomorrow, everyone would see. Not just Mark and Lisa, but the entire corporate world they inhabited. Because when you underestimate Aurora, you don't just get a surprise, you get a spectacle. And I was ready to give them a show they'd never forget. The morning of the big reveal dawned crisp and clear, almost mockingly perfect. I arrived at Mark's office building precisely at 9:58 a.m., 2 minutes before his critical quarterly review meeting was scheduled to begin on the 17th floor. I wasn't just carrying a purse. I was carrying 2 large, expensive suitcases. Mark's suitcases, meticulously packed with every single item of his clothing, his toiletries, even his worn-out world's best husband mug. Each bag felt surprisingly light, considering the emotional weight they carried. It was like I was delivering not just his belongings, but the entire crumbling edifice of our marriage. And it felt glorious. I walked past the reception desk, nodding politely to Carol, the perpetually cheerful receptionist who probably thought I was just dropping off some forgotten paperwork. Little did she know, I was about to drop a bomb. I took the elevator up, the ascent feeling less like a mundane commute and more like a slow-motion climb to the summit of Mount Vesuvius. My heart was doing a tango, but my face was a picture of serene composure. I even hummed a little tune in my head, something upbeat, like a pop song about liberation. As I stepped out onto the 17th floor, the hushed intensity of a major corporate meeting was palpable. The door to the executive conference room was slightly ajar, and I could hear Mark's voice, smooth and confident, presenting his projections. And as you can see, Q3 shows significant growth in... He paused, probably for dramatic effect. This was my cue. I pushed the door open, not with a bang, but with a gentle, almost apologetic creak. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Mark's eyes, initially filled with annoyance at the interruption, widened in disbelief. Lisa, sitting next to him, looked up, a faint blush on her cheeks, probably thinking I was there to bring Mark his forgotten lunch. Oh, sweet summer child. Aurora? Mark stammered, his carefully constructed corporate persona cracking like an old porcelain doll. What are you doing here? I smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Oh, Mark, darling, I began, my voice clear and carrying. I just realized you forgot something very important at home. I gestured to the 2 suitcases I was dragging behind me. The clatter of the wheels on the polished floor echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The executives, a sea of bewildered faces, looked from me to Mark, then to the suitcases, then back to Mark, their expressions a mix of confusion and dawning horror. This was not on the agenda. I don't understand, Mark stammered again, his face now a shade of puce usually reserved for overcooked lobsters. Lisa, meanwhile, had gone from a faint blush to a deathly pale, like she'd just seen a ghost, or perhaps her career flashing before her eyes. Well, it's quite simple, really, I continued, stepping further into the room, pulling the suitcases right up to the head of the table, directly in front of Mark. You see, I found these in our bedroom closet this morning, and it occurred to me that since you've apparently decided to move on to a, shall we say, different living arrangement, you'd probably need your things. I opened the first suitcase, revealing a neatly folded stack of his dress shirts. Wouldn't want you to be without your favorite blue pinstripe, would we? It really brings out the ambition in your eyes. A ripple went through the room. A few executives exchanged glances. One even stifled a cough. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Mark looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. Lisa, bless her heart, was trying to melt into her chair. Aurora! This is highly inappropriate, Mark hissed, his voice low and furious. We can discuss this later at home. Oh, but darling, I retorted, my voice still sweet, I think we are discussing it. Right here. Right now. Because, you see, I also found this. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small velvet gift box. I opened it, revealing the silver necklace with the M and L initials, holding it up for everyone to see. The light caught the engraving, making it sparkle. It seems you also forgot this little trinket. And since L isn't exactly a common initial in our family, I took the liberty of assuming it was for the person you've been spending so much overtime with. My gaze flickered to Lisa, who was now visibly trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear a pin drop, and probably the sound of Mark's career aspirations shattering into a million pieces. The executives, who moments ago were discussing profit margins, were now witnessing a live-action soap opera, and I was the star. I believe, I continued, my voice gaining a touch of steel, that this belongs to Lisa. I walked over to Lisa's chair, gently placing the open box on the table in front of her. Unless, of course, you've decided to adopt a new middle name, Mark? Something like liar? Lisa let out a small choked gasp. Mark finally found his voice, a desperate, pleading whisper. Aurora, please! This is a professional setting. Oh, I agree, Mark, I said, turning back to him, my smile unwavering. It is a professional setting, which is why I thought it was only fair to bring your personal life into it, since you seem to have such trouble keeping them separate. After all, you're always talking about synergy, aren't you? Well, here's some synergy for you. Your home life, your work life, and your side hustle. I emphasized the last two words with a pointed glance at Lisa, all coming together in one glorious, transparent moment. One of the older executives, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Albright, cleared her throat. Mark, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, perhaps you'd like to explain this situation? Her eyes, however, were anything but calm. They were sharp, assessing, and utterly devoid of sympathy. Mark looked like a deer caught in headlights, then like a deer that had just been hit by a truck, then like a deer that was now being served as venison. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. It was a beautiful thing to witness. The man who always had an answer, always a slick line, was utterly speechless. No need, Ms. Albright, I interjected, saving Mark from having to dig his own grave any deeper. I think the suitcases and the necklace speak for themselves. Mark is simply relocating his personal effects, and I, for one, am here to assist with the smooth transition. I picked up the second suitcase, which contained his casual clothes, and ironically, his I Love My Wife t-shirt. I even packed his favorite golf clubs, because, he'll need a new hobby now that his old one, deceiving his wife, has been so publicly exposed. The room erupted in a low murmur. Not quite laughter, but a collective gasp of shock and a few suppressed chuckles. The situational humor was undeniable. Here was a woman, calmly delivering her cheating husband's luggage to his mistress in the middle of a high-stakes corporate meeting. It was absurd, it was dramatic, and it was undeniably satisfying. I gave Mark one last, pitying look. Well, darling, I said, my voice dripping with mock concern, I do hope you find a comfortable new place to lay your head, and perhaps a new job, because I have a feeling this one might not be quite as accommodating anymore. I turned to the room, giving a slight, elegant bow. Thank you for your time, everyone. I trust this presentation was enlightening. Then, with a final triumphant smirk that was equal parts satisfaction and pure unadulterated sass, I turned and walked out, leaving Mark, Lisa, and the entire executive board to ponder the true meaning of synergy. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the stunned silence, leaving me to bask in the sweet, sweet victory of a perfectly executed, perfectly humiliating, perfectly public divorce announcement. Never imagined a few suitcases could cause such a corporate meltdown. And no, nobody was even into art. The aftermath was, as expected, a glorious mess. Mark's reputation, once as polished as his expensive shoes, was now thoroughly scuffed, stained, and probably thrown out with the rest of his emotional baggage. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the office like wildfire, fueled by the sheer audacity of my performance. Did you hear about Aurora? She brought his bags to the meeting. And the necklace. Oh, the necklace. It was the kind of office gossip that legends are made of, whispered in hushed tones over water coolers and in hushed, delighted emails. Mark was, predictably, furious. He called, he texted, he even showed up at my, now our, house, demanding an explanation. How could you do that to me, Aurora? In front of everyone? He spluttered, his face still a mottled shade of red. I just looked at him, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Oh, darling, I'd replied. I merely returned your property and exposed a few inconvenient truths. Think of it as a public service announcement for your next unsuspecting victim. He didn't have much to say after that. The divorce papers were served a week later, and he signed them with surprising speed. Turns out, public humiliation is a great motivator. Lisa, the spreadsheet angel, found herself grounded. Her internship was, shall we say, re-evaluated. Last I heard, she was working at a coffee shop, probably still trying to figure out if a latte was worth a ruined career. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the unicorn emojis and the spreadsheet angel moniker. And the feeling passed. Some lessons are best learned the hard way, preferably with a side of public shame. My own life, surprisingly, didn't fall apart. It simply rearranged itself, like a chaotic puzzle finally clicking into place. The new normal was less about catering to Mark's whims and more about rediscovering my own. My career, which had always taken a back seat to Mark's more important one, suddenly flourished. Without the constant drain of his emotional baggage and the subtle gaslighting, I found I had more energy, more focus, more me. I started taking on bigger projects, speaking up more in meetings, and generally being less of a soft-focus background character and more of a vibrant, unapologetic protagonist. My family, initially shocked, eventually came around. My mother, after a few days of pearl clutching, admitted, "Well, Aurora, he did deserve it. And you always were the clever one." My sister, Clara, even offered to help me move, which, coming from her, was practically an act of sainthood. Even Brenda, my sister-in-law, called, not to criticize but to ask for details. "So he really went pale? Like ghost white?" she'd asked, a hint of glee in her voice. Turns out, even the favorite enjoys a good dose of schadenfreude. I realized that for too long, I had been living in the shadow of other people's expectations, other people's narratives. I had been the good wife, the supportive partner, the invisible woman, and in doing so, I had lost a piece of myself, the piece that was sharp, witty, and utterly unwilling to be walked all over, the piece that found humor in the darkest of situations, the piece that, apparently, knew how to pack a mean suitcase. There's a strange kind of freedom in hitting rock bottom, or rather, in being pushed off a cliff by someone you trusted. You realize that the only way to go is up, and that you're much stronger, much more resilient, and much funnier than you ever gave yourself credit for. I didn't become a bitter, vengeful woman. I became a woman who understood the power of a well-timed punchline, a perfectly placed piece of luggage, and a public spectacle. I still see Mark occasionally. He's usually alone, looking a little grayer, a little more defeated. He never makes eye contact. And I, Aurora, just smile. Not a mean smile, but a knowing one. A smile that says, "Remember that time you thought I was invisible? Well, look at me now." In the end, family is who doesn't laugh at your face, only at the joke you've become. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they laugh with you, especially when you're the one telling the best, most absurd, most satisfying punchline of all.